Officer Ethan Cole thought it was just another quiet patrol with his German shepherd, Rex. But deep in the woods, Rex's sudden barking led him to a shocking sight. An armored truck, rusting and forgotten for nearly 40 years. Inside were skeletons, stacks of decaying cash, and a secret someone had tried to bury forever. What Ethan uncovered that day would change not only his life, but the fate of everyone who dared to chase the truth. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. The town of Dawsonville, nestled in the rolling hills of northern Georgia, was a place where fog often hung thick across the pine ridges at dawn, and the air carried the scent of damp earth. The community was small, conservative, and bound by traditions of hunting, farming, and church gatherings on Sundays. Autumn had settled with a strange heaviness that year, the nights cooler than usual, the mornings shrouded in mist so dense that street lamps glowed like pale moons over the cracked asphalt of Main Street. It was a harsh season, not in storms or floods, but in the relentless sense of silence pressing against the town. The economy had faltered, and people walked slower, shoulders bent, as though carrying burdens too heavy to share. Against this backdrop, Officer Ethan Cole lived a life that straddled duty and solitude. Ethan was 38 years old, a man shaped by both the discipline of law enforcement and the quiet tragedies of his personal life. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair cut short in regulation style and a jaw marked by faint stubble he never seemed to fully shave away, Ethan carried the look of a man who belonged more to the field than behind a desk. His eyes, gray-blue like the storm clouds that often rolled in from the Appalachian foothills, revealed both resilience and fatigue. He had once been married, but the union ended abruptly when his wife, a nurse, left after years of struggle with Ethan's devotion to the badge and his inability to leave the trauma of the job at the station door. Since then, Ethan had grown quieter, more inward. His colleagues respected him as steady, dependable, yet reserved, rarely one to join in jokes over coffee. The one true companion Ethan trusted fully was Rex, his German shepherd partner. Rex was 5 years old, bred for police work, and carried the muscular frame of his breed with an elegance born of discipline. His coat was a rich mix of tan and black, darker across the back, lighter around the chest, with intelligent amber eyes that seemed always to be calculating, watching, understanding far more than a dog should. Rex had been trained from a pup in tracking and protection, yet beyond his sharp instincts, he had a loyalty that was unshakable. To strangers, he was a formidable animal, ears pricked, stance alert, a presence that could intimidate without a growl. To Ethan, however, he was more than a partner. He was solace, a reminder that not all bonds broke under the weight of hardship. On that particular morning, the mist was heavier than usual. The woods beyond Dawsonville stretched for miles, thick with pine, oak, and tangled undergrowth. Ethan often took Rex into the forest trails on days when his shift ended early, preferring the hush of nature over the chatter of town. That morning his boots crunched over damp leaves, and the earthy scent of decay from last night's rainfall clung to the air. The forest floor glistened with moisture, mushrooms swelling at the base of tree, trunks, and the faint drip of water echoed as it fell from leaves still heavy with dew. Ethan moved with the habitual awareness of a man trained to observe every detail. He noticed the way the mist curled low in the hollows, the absence of birdsong in certain parts of the woods, the peculiar silence that made the crunch of his footsteps seem louder. Rex trotted a few paces ahead, nose down, tail swaying in calculated arcs. They had walked this way countless times, and Ethan considered it their unspoken ritual. Man and dog pushing deeper into the woods, away from roads, away from human noise, seeking something he could not define. It was Rex who broke the rhythm. The dog froze, ears pointed forward, and gave a low growl. His body stiffened, muscles taut, and he sniffed the ground with sudden urgency. Ethan stopped immediately, hand brushing the sidearm holstered at his hip more out of instinct than fear. He knew Rex well enough to understand that this was not the casual interest of a dog catching the scent of a squirrel. This was focus, sharp and deliberate. "Easy, boy," Ethan muttered, his voice low but steady, the tone of command mixed with reassurance. Rex ignored him, moving toward a thicket of underbrush. The dog's paws pressed into the damp soil, pushing aside branches, until he stopped at a patch of ground where moss clung thick and green across an oddly raised mound. He began to paw at the surface, claws scraping away wet leaves and soil. Ethan crouched beside him, pushing the foliage aside. What caught his eye first was the glint, faint, dull, but undeniably metallic, beneath the green. His hand brushed away more of the moss, fingertips scraping against cold, uneven steel. The texture was rough with rust, yet the shape that emerged was too angular, too precise to be a fallen piece of farming equipment or junk left behind. He leaned closer, heart thudding, as Rex whined softly, pacing in a tight circle as though sensing the gravity of the discovery. Ethan dug further, using a stick to pry away layers of soil. Slowly, the outline began to reveal itself. Rivets along the surface, thick steel panels, edges reinforced in ways that farming machinery never required. He recognized the architecture almost immediately, his training filling in the conclusion before his mind fully accepted it. This was not a tractor. This was not a truck for hauling timber or goods. This was armored steel, the kind used for vehicles meant to carry cash or high-value cargo. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. He pulled back, scanning the hollow where the object rested at an odd angle, half swallowed by the earth, vines wrapped around its corners like chains trying to drag it deeper underground. The storm from earlier in the week must have shifted the soil, exposing just enough to catch Rex's attention. Without that chance of weather and instinct, it might have remained buried for another generation. Ethan stood in silence, his breath fogging in, the cool air, mind racing through the implications. He had seen abandoned vehicles in his time, stripped-down cars rusting along dirt tracks, but never anything like this. Never something with the aura of deliberate concealment. Questions crowded his thoughts. How long had it been here? Why had no one spoken of it? What had happened to the people inside? Rex returned to his side, pressing against his leg, eyes sharp, waiting. Ethan laid a hand on the dog's head, steadying himself. Whatever this was, it had not been left here by accident. And in that moment, standing in the damp hollow with fog swirling between the trees and the shape of rusting steel emerging beneath moss and soil, Ethan Cole understood something with bone-deep certainty. His life was about to change. He could not yet know that the truck carried more than rust and shadows. He could not yet know that bones and broken dreams lay within, or that his discovery would stir forces still lingering in silence after decades. All he knew was that the forest had given up a secret, and now it belonged to him. Ethan Cole returned to the forest the following morning, driven by an unshakable pull that made him restless through the night. The air was damp and heavy, the sky over Dawsonville veiled in low gray clouds that pressed down on the town like a lid. The mist had not lifted, and the silence that spread through the woods felt even thicker than the day before. He had prepared carefully, boots laced tight, gloves to shield his hands, a sturdy crowbar slung in his pack, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a coil of rope. Rex trotted at his side, his ears alert, the faint fog clinging to his sleek black and tan coat, making him look like a phantom moving through the haze. The dog's breath puffed in short white clouds, and his eyes carried that sharp anticipation that Ethan had come to trust more than any weapon. They reached the hollow, the earth damp and giving underfoot, vines hanging limp like broken ropes. The outline of the armored truck loomed half-buried, its steel sides streaked with rust and moss. Ethan paused, feeling the weight of history pressing against him. He crouched, laid a hand on the cold surface, and whispered to himself, "Let's see what you've been hiding." Rex circled once, gave a low bark, and sat back on his haunches, tense but patient. Ethan set to work, scraping soil away from what he remembered was the outline of a door. The crowbar bit into the seam, his gloves slipping against the slick rust. Minutes turned into nearly an hour, his muscles burning as he pried again and again, until at last the metal groaned like some wounded beast. The sound echoed across the hollow, and Rex barked sharply in alarm. Ethan pressed harder, his breath ragged, until the door shifted outward with a long screech, spilling a rush of fetid air so thick with mold and decay that he staggered back, gagging. Rex growled low, hackles raised, teeth bared as though something inside still lingered. Ethan steadied himself, lifted the flashlight, and shone the beam into the yawning black interior. The light caught twisted steel, shadows clinging like cobwebs, and a glint of something pale. He stepped forward cautiously, boots crunching over the edge of the threshold, and the smell enveloped him. Damp mildew, rotting paper, and a sour undertone that chilled his stomach. The beam fell across the center of the compartment. A large steel safe lay built into the floor, its door blown open long ago, the lock twisted and broken. Inside was a ruin of money, bricks of bills fused into green-brown pulp. Yet here and there, astonishingly, some bundles remained sharp and intact, their faded ink still declaring them as United States currency. Ethan crouched, brushing a glove across the top of one bundle, the paper fragile yet undeniably real. Millions of dollars had once filled this vault. Now only fragments survived, but even fragments could hold danger. Rex whined, pulling Ethan's attention to the far corner. The beam of light swung, and Ethan froze. Against the steel wall lay a shape. Bones, yellowed and crumbling, ribs splayed in unnatural angles, the skull tilted back in a silent scream. Another pile of bones lay near the rear door, and another sprawled half-buried beneath debris. At least 3 men had died here, their remains twisted as though violence had erupted in the claustrophobic space. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen death before, accidents on highways, crime scenes in decaying houses. But this was different. This was death swallowed by the forest, hidden for decades, forgotten by everyone except the earth that tried to consume it. He raised the light higher and noticed something else. Shell casings scattered across the floor, their brass dulled with age. Bullet holes pocked the steel walls, a silent record of a firefight that must have echoed through these woods once upon a time. His mind raced. A missing armored truck, millions in cash, 3 dead men. Why had this not been uncovered? Why buried here in silence? Was it robbery, betrayal, or something larger? The official records he had glimpsed the night before were too thin, too neatly tied off. Someone had wanted this forgotten. He stepped deeper into the truck, his boots crunching against brittle bones. Rex followed reluctantly, nose wrinkled at the stench, ears pinned back, growling at shadows. Ethan crouched again near the safe, scanning the papers, the scattered bullets, the broken skeletons. Each detail told part of a story, but none gave the ending. In the half-light, Ethan imagined the moment. The armored truck rumbling down a dirt road in 1986. 3 guards tense, guns across their laps, bags of cash stacked high. Then betrayal, someone turning a weapon inside the cab, shouting, bullets tearing through steel walls, chaos exploding in seconds. The survivors dragging the truck into the woods, hiding it, maybe fighting until no one walked away. And after, only silence. Ethan's hand tightened on the flashlight. This was not simply a discovery of the past. This was evidence of murder, theft, and a cover-up that had lingered for decades. And the fact that it had remained untouched told him that powerful hands had ensured its burial. He stood, his shadow long and thin against the corroded walls, and whispered, "What the hell did I just step into?" Rex answered with another growl, low and uneasy, his amber eyes fixed on the doorway as though expecting someone to step through at any moment. Ethan turned, scanning the hollow beyond. The mist had thinned slightly, pale light filtering through the trees, yet the wood seemed darker than before. Every crack of a branch, every stir of leaves now carried weight, as though the forest itself guarded its secret. He backed out of the truck, his flashlight beam trembling, the discovery burning itself into his memory. He knew he could not walk away, but he also knew that whatever road he had just stepped onto would not be safe. By the time he sealed the door again and climbed back toward the ridge, his mind was already racing. He would need records, reports, evidence beyond what lay in the rusting tomb. He would need to understand why this truck had been left to rot and who had wanted it erased. He glanced down at Rex, who padded close, ears flicking nervously. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's strong neck and murmured, "We've started something we can't walk away from, boy." The forest gave no answer, only the whisper of the wind and the rustle of unseen wings moving through the canopy. But Ethan felt the truth settle into his bones. The secret was no longer buried. It belonged to him now, and the price of uncovering it would be steep. Back at the Dawson County Sheriff's Office, the building stood as it had for decades. A squat brick structure with faded tan paint and narrow windows that never let in enough light. The fluorescent bulbs buzzed faintly overhead, casting everything in a pale, tired glow. Ethan Cole pushed through the double doors with Rex at his side, the German shepherd padding silently, his nails clicking against the linoleum floor. The station smelled of burnt coffee and old paper, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, weighed down by routine and bureaucracy. Ethan headed straight for the records room. It was a cramped, dusty chamber tucked behind the main office, with metal filing cabinets stacked shoulder-high and shelves groaning under the weight of old boxes. The air was thick with the mustiness of yellowed folders and forgotten reports. Behind the desk sat Clara Jenkins, the station's records clerk. Clara was in her mid-50s, a wiry woman with short, iron-gray hair cropped close around her ears, deep lines etched into her narrow face from years of squinting under harsh office lights. Her sharp brown eyes rarely missed a detail, and though her job was monotonous, she carried it out with a pride that bordered on stubbornness. Known for her brisk efficiency, Clara was the type who insisted every form be signed in black ink and every report filed in chronological order. Life had made her tough. She had lost her husband to cancer a decade ago and had raised 2 boys on her own, one of whom had gone into the army and never returned. That pain had hardened her voice, but not dulled her precision. Ethan offered her a curt nod. "Clara, I need to dig through some archives. Cases from the mid-'80s. She arched one graying eyebrow, her voice clipped and skeptical. "The '80s? That's a long way back, Cole. What are you chasing?" "Just a personal inquiry," Ethan replied, keeping his tone even. He had no intention of spilling the truth until he understood more himself. Rex sat obediently at his heel, though his ears flicked at the sound of Clara's chair scraping back. Clara studied him for a moment, then gave a small shrug. Suit yourself. Don't go making a mess back there. Those boxes don't put themselves back in order. With that, she fetched a heavy keyring from her desk and led him to a locked cabinet at the rear. The smell of dust and aging cardboard hit harder as the door swung open. She flicked on a dim lamp, muttered something about wasting her morning, and left him to his search. Ethan pulled out boxes marked 1985, 1986, and 1987, stacking them carefully on a wooden table scarred by decades of use. He flipped through folders, each one brittle and worn, reports written in typewriter ink fading to gray, arrest records, thefts, assaults, minor robberies. Then, tucked between two thick binders, his fingers closed around a thinner file, its tab marked in faded ink. Armored truck, missing 1986. His chest tightened as he spread the folder open. Inside were a handful of typed pages, some photographs, and scribbled notes. The first page summarized the incident. On September 17, 1986, an armored transport carrying approximately $10 million in cash from a regional bank depot to the Federal Reserve Branch in Atlanta failed to arrive at its destination. Last contact was recorded near a rural highway outside Dawson County. Vehicle and crew unaccounted for. Photographs clipped to the page showed grainy images of the missing men. 3 guards in uniform, stiff in their poses. Ethan studied their faces. Square jaws, thick mustaches, hair parted neatly in the style of the time. One man, in particular, caught his eye. Daniel McGraw, early 40s, broad forehead, mustache thick, his gaze strangely flat even in the blurred photograph. Beside him stood Leonard Price, mid-30s, wiry frame, deep-set eyes, his grin forced as though uncomfortable under the camera's gaze. The third, Michael Tate, was barely in his 20s, fresh-faced, clean-shaven, his expression caught between pride and nervousness. 3 men who had once carried guns and guarded money, now reduced to ink and fading memories. The report noted the vehicle had departed at 9:15 a.m., last sighted by a highway patrolman an hour later, then vanished without a trace. Search efforts had been extensive at first, involving county sheriffs, state police, and even FBI coordination, but within weeks the investigation was scaled back. By December, the file was marked inactive. At the bottom of the last page, in red pen, someone had written, "No further leads. Case suspended." Ethan's jaw clenched. $10 million, 3 men, and a missing armored truck, just abandoned as though it were nothing. He flipped through the photographs again and found one more, tucked behind a report. It showed a stretch of road near Dawson County, patrol cars parked in the distance, officers combing through the brush. A caption beneath it read, "Final confirmed sighting, September 1986. Rex shifted, letting out a faint whine, his amber eyes fixed on Ethan's tense grip on the paper. Ethan lowered the file, exhaling slowly. Why had the investigation ended so abruptly? Why had no one followed through? He knew from experience that cases could stall for lack of evidence, but this felt different. The absence of detail, the speed with which the case had been buried, it all suggested something darker. Footsteps echoed behind him. Clara reappeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Find what you were looking for?" Ethan closed the file halfway, his voice steady. "Enough to ask more questions." Clara gave a dry chuckle, adjusting the sleeves of her cardigan. "Be careful, Cole. Old files like that. Sometimes they're closed for a reason. Dig too deep, and you might not like what you find." Her words hung in the air as she left him standing amid the dust and silence. Ethan slid the file back, into its folder, but kept a mental note of every name, every date. He gathered Rex, who pressed close to his leg, and stepped back into the main office, his mind already churning. $10 million had vanished. 3 men had died. The forest had whispered the truth, but the paper trail confirmed it. Someone had buried more than just a truck. Ethan walked out of the station into the cool afternoon. Clouds thickened overhead, shadows deepening across Main Street. He tightened his coat, Rex trotting close, and whispered under his breath, "This isn't over." The evening had settled heavy over Dawsonville, the sky a low blanket of slate, clouds swallowing the moon and leaving the town draped in dim streetlight. Main Street was nearly empty. Only the hum of neon signs flickered outside the handful of establishments that stayed alive after dark. Among them, tucked between a pawn shop and a gas station that smelled perpetually of oil and rust, stood Harlan's Tavern, a weathered bar that had been a fixture in town for nearly 40 years. Its wooden sign creaked in the wind, and cigarette smoke curled out every time the door swung open. Ethan Cole pushed through that door with Rex at his side. The tavern's interior was dim, the air thick with the mingling scents of stale beer, fried food, and tobacco. Country music crackled faintly from an old jukebox in the corner, and the bar's low ceiling trapped both sound and smoke. The crowd was the same as always, men in work boots and denim jackets, shoulders bent with years of hard labor, faces carved by sun and hardship. A few women sat at tables near the back, hair teased high or cut bluntly, voices sharp as they argued over cards. Rex settled at Ethan's heel, his ears twitching, amber eyes scanning the room with a wariness that mirrored his master's. Ethan nodded at the bartender, a broad man with a thick black beard streaked with gray, heavy arms bulging beneath a flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves. This was Tom Harlan, the bar's owner, a man in his late 50s whose booming laugh had once been the soul of the tavern but had grown rarer in recent years. Tom was known as fair, but firm, a man who broke up fights with his own hands rather than calling the law, and carried the scars on his knuckles to prove it. "Evening, Cole," Tom said, wiping down a glass with a rag that had seen better days. His voice was gravelly, years of smoke grinding into it. "Don't usually see you in here unless something's on your mind." "Evening, Tom," Ethan replied, taking a seat at the bar. "Just looking to ask a few questions." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Questions don't come free here. You want answers? You buy a drink." Ethan smirked faintly and ordered a coffee, which made Tom chuckle before pouring him a glass of whiskey anyway. "You'll need this more than caffeine," Tom muttered, sliding the drink across. It was then Ethan noticed a figure at the far end of the bar, slouched over a half-empty glass. The man was old, likely in his late 70s, with a crown of thin white hair clinging stubbornly to his scalp. His skin was weathered and darkened by years of outdoor work, his cheeks hollowed, his jaw rough with patches of white stubble. His hands, resting on the bar, were knotted with veins and scarred, the fingers bent as if broken and healed poorly long ago. This was Walter Briggs, once a mill worker, now a relic of the town's forgotten backbone. Walter was known for his silence, for staring too long into his glass, but he carried a weight in his eyes that suggested he had seen far more than he ever spoke aloud. Tonight, though, his cheeks were flushed with liquor, and his tongue loosened by drink. Tom followed Ethan's gaze and leaned closer. "Careful with that one." Walter's been here longer than most. He remembers things folks pretend they forgot. Ethan took his glass and moved closer, Rex padding softly beside him. He eased onto the stool next to Walter, the old wood creaking under his weight. "Evening," Ethan offered quietly. Walter glanced sideways, his eyes bloodshot yet piercing, as if weighing Ethan's soul in a single look. His voice came slow, rasped by age and whiskey. "You're the coal boy, ain't you?" "Sheriff's man now." "That's right," Ethan said, steady. "Just trying to understand a piece of this town's history." Walter let out a humorless chuckle, the sound harsh. "History's a dangerous thing, son." Best left buried, Ethan leaned closer. 1986. The armored truck that disappeared. 3 men missing. $10 million. You remember it, don't you? The tavern seemed to hush around them, though the jukebox still crooned and glasses still clinked. Walter's hand tightened around his drink, knuckles white. He licked his cracked lips and lowered his voice to a whisper. "I remember," Walter said. "Everybody remembers. But no one talks." He paused, eyes darting briefly toward Tom, who was pretending not to listen. "Because the ones who lived through it know the truth. It wasn't just some robbery gone wrong. Some of the law was in on it. Men with badges. Men you'd never think would dirty their hands. They turned their guns on each other before the money was ever split. Blood soaked that steel box before it was dragged into the woods. And the ones who didn't die, they made sure the case got buried." Ethan felt the words strike like a cold wind through his chest. Rex gave a low growl, hackles bristling, as though sensing the danger behind the confession. "Why say this now?" Ethan pressed. Walter's eyes grew wet, his voice breaking into a bitter laugh. "Because I'm old, and whiskey's stronger than fear tonight. But don't think it'll last. Come morning, I'll deny every word. That's how it's always been. Silence is safer than the grave." He pushed away from the bar, leaving his drink unfinished, and staggered towards the door. Tom watched him go, his beard hiding an expression that was half pity, half warning. Ethan sat in silence, his drink untouched, Rex pressed close against his leg. The weight of Walter's words hung like chains around his thoughts. Corruption, betrayal, a town complicit in silence. He knew then that the armored truck was more than a forgotten crime scene. It was the edge of a wound that still festered in Dawsonville. As Ethan left the tavern, the night air hit cold against his skin. The neon sign flickered overhead, buzzing like an omen. Rex's ears twitched, his growl rumbling deep in his throat. For the first time, Ethan felt the shadows pressing close, as if the forest itself was listening. And he knew this was no longer just about the past. Whatever had been buried in 1986 was still alive, still dangerous, and now it had noticed him. The road home was quiet, too quiet for Ethan Cole's liking. The headlights of his patrol truck cut through the mist as he drove the familiar route past shuttered stores and dim houses, yet tonight everything seemed wrong. Curtains twitched, shadows lingered too long in alleys, and his gut carried the kind of tension only years in uniform could sharpen. Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, not relaxed as usual, but with ears pricked, his amber eyes darting toward every movement in the dark. Ethan's modest house stood on the edge of Dawsonville, a one-story ranch-style home with peeling white paint and a porch that creaked under its own weight. It wasn't much, but it had been his sanctuary after long shifts. Tonight, however, the moment he stepped out of the truck, the air shifted. The stillness felt heavy, as if the house itself held its breath. Rex growled low, his hackles rising. Ethan approached the front door and immediately noticed the subtle details. Scratches around the lock, a faint splinter in the wood frame. His pulse quickened. He drew his sidearm, eased the door open, and let Rex slip inside first, the dog moving like liquid shadow. The interior smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke, something Ethan never allowed. His living room was in disarray, papers scattered across the floor, drawers pulled halfway open, and his coffee table overturned. He swept each room methodically, clearing corners with the precision of training. The kitchen cabinets gaped open, boxes of cereal dumped out, even the refrigerator door left ajar. His small bedroom was no better. His desk rifled through, the drawer where he had left the copies of the armored truck file completely empty. Whoever had been here knew exactly what to look for. Rex barked sharply in the back room, and Ethan rushed in. The dog stood rigid before the window, tail stiff, growling at the yard beyond. Ethan peered through the glass, but saw only darkness and the silhouette of pine trees swaying in the night breeze. Still, the feeling was undeniable. He was being watched. He lowered his weapon slowly, forcing himself to breathe evenly. Panic was dangerous. Discipline kept him alive. He knelt beside Rex, resting a hand on the dog's muscular neck, feeling the vibration of the growl still running through him. "We're not alone anymore, boy," he whispered. The rest of the night passed in restless silence. Ethan sat in his living room with every light off, Rex at his feet, both of them listening for the smallest sound. Once, around midnight, Ethan thought he saw the faint red glow of a cigarette across the street, a pinprick of fire that flared and died. When he looked again, it was gone. The following day at the station, Ethan carried himself with his usual calm, but inside he was rattled. He avoided Clara Jenkins's sharp gaze and gave no hint of what had happened. Instead, he busied himself with routine reports, though every so often he caught movement outside the narrow windows, black SUVs idling too long, unfamiliar men watching with eyes too cold. Whether it was paranoia or truth, he couldn't decide, but Rex seemed to confirm his fears. Each night the dog grew more restless, barking into shadows, patrolling the house as if expecting intruders. One afternoon, while walking Rex along a wooded trail outside town, Ethan noticed footprints in the mud. Fresh, too large for children, too heavy to belong to hunters. They followed the path parallel to his own, and ended abruptly at tire tracks near the road. Whoever was watching him wasn't careless. They were trained. That evening, as he sat on his porch, his neighbor stopped by. Marcy Allen, a widow in her late 40s, petite, with sandy blonde hair streaked with gray and pale skin that carried the weariness of long hours at the diner she managed, leaned over the fence. Her eyes, a sharp hazel, scanned his face with concern. "You all right, Ethan?" I heard Rex barking half the night. "Folks say you had company." Ethan forced a faint smile. "Just raccoons." "He's protective." Marcy frowned, unconvinced. She had always been kind to him, bringing over casseroles during the lonely years after his divorce, but she was also perceptive. "Well, just be careful. There's been strangers around town, men I don't recognize, asking questions they shouldn't. Dawsonville doesn't need more trouble." She gave Rex a pat, her hand brushing his thick fur, then left with a warning glance over her shoulder. Ethan watched her go, the unease inside him growing heavier. The break-in hadn't been random. The missing papers proved someone wanted to erase the truth before he dug deeper. Now strangers in town confirmed it. The past wasn't just resurfacing. It was pushing back. That night, when Rex barked into the darkness again, Ethan didn't hush him. Instead, he sat in silence, sidearm resting on the table, eyes locked on the window where the forest pressed close. He knew now he was not just uncovering a mystery. He was walking into a war that had never truly ended. The night was colder than usual when Ethan Cole returned to the hollow. The wind moved through the trees like a low whisper, carrying with it the scent of pine and wet earth. He hadn't planned on coming back so soon after the break-in, but the gnawing suspicion inside him left him no choice. The armored truck lay half buried and silent, but Ethan knew silence didn't mean safety. Rex padded at his side, his black and tan coat blending into the shadows, each movement alert and precise. The dog had been restless all day, as if he sensed something Ethan could not see. The moon was just a thin silver line in the sky, barely lighting the trail as they pushed through underbrush. When Ethan reached the clearing, he crouched low, scanning the hollow. His flashlight stayed off. Tonight, darkness was his ally. Rex froze suddenly, ears perked, body rigid. A faint rustle carried through the mist, followed by the unmistakable click of metal against metal. Ethan's chest tightened. They weren't alone. From the far side of the hollow, two men emerged. They moved with the smooth precision of predators, not clumsy hunters or curious hikers. Both carried rifles slung across their chests, the barrels gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The first man was tall, broad-shouldered, perhaps in his 40s, his head shaved clean, a thick beard covering his square jaw. His posture was military, disciplined, the kind of man trained for violence. The second was leaner, wiry, his face narrow with sharp cheekbones, a jagged scar running from his left temple down across his cheek. His dark hair was cropped short, his movements quick and nervous, eyes darting as though he trusted no corner of the forest. These were not amateurs. They were professionals. Ethan's instincts screamed retreat. He pressed a hand to Rex's neck, signaling silence, and eased backward into the brush. But the scarred man stopped suddenly, crouching near the soil where Ethan had pried open the truck days before. He ran his hand over the disturbed earth, his lips twisting into a grin. "Somebody's been here." His voice low and rasping, carrying just enough for Ethan to hear. The bearded man grunted, scanning the tree line. "Then they'll be back. Keep your eyes open." Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He and Rex began to slip away, moving through the brush with painstaking care, but then a twig snapped underfoot. Both men's heads whipped toward the sound. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and the scarred man shouted, "There!" Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through branches, splinters flying as Ethan dropped flat and shouted, "Go, Rex!" The German shepherd bolted into the shadows, barking ferociously, drawing attention away from Ethan. The two men turned their rifles toward the sound, chasing the dog's movement. But Rex was too fast, weaving through the underbrush with a predator's cunning. Ethan crawled low, his heart pounding, before breaking into a sprint. He zigzagged between trees, his boots hammering the damp ground, branches clawing at his jacket. Behind him, the men shouted, their boots crashing through the forest, rifles barking in sharp bursts. Each shot cracked the night, echoing through the woods like thunder. Rex reappeared ahead, bursting through the trees, and Ethan felt a surge of relief. The dog barked once, then darted off to the right, drawing the gunman away from Ethan's path. Ethan veered left, lungs burning, his breath loud in his ears. The forest was no longer a refuge. It was a labyrinth of shadows and danger. The chase stretched on, minutes feeling like hours. Ethan's muscles screamed, but adrenaline drove him forward. At one point, the bearded man's flashlight beam caught him in its edge, and Ethan dove behind a fallen log just as bullets chewed through the bark. Rex lunged from the darkness, slamming into the scarred man's legs, sending him sprawling with a curse. The dog's teeth snapped inches from the man's arm before Ethan whistled sharply. Rex disengaged instantly, vanishing back into the brush as another volley of gunfire split the air. Finally, the sounds of pursuit began to fade. Ethan crouched low in the thickets, chest heaving, every muscle trembling. Rex pressed against him, panting, eyes blazing with fierce loyalty. Ethan stroked the dog's head, whispering, "You saved me again, boy." They waited until the forest quieted, though silence felt fragile now, like glass ready to shatter. Ethan could still hear the distant crunch of boots, the curses of frustrated hunters who had lost their prey. He knew this would not be the last time. These men weren't chasing out of curiosity. They knew exactly what lay in the hollow, and they were determined to keep it theirs. When Ethan finally made it back to his truck, the night sky was paling with the first hint of dawn. He collapsed into the driver's seat, Rex curling into the passenger side, his side still heaving from exertion. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, sweat cooling on his skin, and whispered to himself, "The secret's not just dangerous, it's guarded." He drove away from the forest with the knowledge that the shadows watching him were no longer vague or imagined. They had faces, weapons, and training, and they would not stop until the armored truck and its secrets were kept buried forever. Ethan Cole sat at his kitchen table long after the chase in the woods had ended, his hands trembling slightly as he spread the photographs across the worn wood. The images he had taken with his old Nikon camera, the armored truck rusting in the hollow, the skeleton slumped against steel walls, the decaying bricks of cash, stared back at him like ghosts demanding justice. Rex lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, his amber eyes half closed but still alert, ears twitching at every creak of the old house. Neither man nor dog had slept properly since the encounter with the armed strangers. Both knew the danger had escalated beyond anything the badge could shield. The next morning, Ethan made a decision that gnawed at his conscience but left him no other path. He could not go to the sheriff's office, not after what he had learned. The local force was either compromised or deliberately blind. Instead, he needed someone outside Dawsonville, someone with no ties to the corruption that seemed to seep into every corner of the county. His mind turned to a name he had heard years ago at a training seminar in Atlanta, a journalist known for prying open locked doors of truth. Sarah Whitfield. Sarah was in her mid-30s, tall and slender with sharp features that gave her face a natural intensity. Her hair was a deep auburn, usually tied back in a loose braid, though strands often fell free across her pale, freckled skin, as if mocking the idea of neatness. Her eyes were green, piercing and unflinching, the kind of gaze that made liars squirm. She had built her career on exposing political scandals and corporate fraud, earning both admiration and enemies. Many described her as relentless, even reckless, a woman who had nearly lost her life twice for stories that others would have abandoned. She was known for working alone, refusing to bend under pressure, and for carrying a small leather-bound notebook everywhere she went. Ethan contacted her through a discreet channel, arranging to meet not in Dawsonville, but in a small newsroom office in Atlanta. The drive there was tense. Every time headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, his hand hovered near the holster at his hip. Rex sat upright the entire trip, as if understanding that every mile drew them deeper into peril. The newsroom was a modest building on the edge of downtown, its brick facade weathered but sturdy. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of desks cluttered with papers, coffee cups, and humming computers. The air smelled of ink and burnt coffee, a mixture of fatigue and urgency. Sarah waited at the back corner, seated at a desk buried under stacks of files. She looked up as Ethan entered, her eyes narrowing slightly before softening with curiosity. "You must be Officer Cole," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "You sounded urgent." Ethan nodded, motioning to Rex at his side. "This is Rex. He's with me in everything. I don't trust anyone else." Sarah's lips curved in a faint smile as she glanced at the dog. "Smart. Dogs don't lie." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me what you've got." Ethan laid out the photographs, one by one, his voice steady though his pulse raced. He described the forest, the armored truck buried for nearly 4 decades, the skeletons, the ruined cache, the armed men who had hunted him through the woods. Sarah listened without interruption, her green eyes flicking between him and the evidence, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk in thought. When he finished, she leaned back, arms crossed. If what you're saying is true, this is bigger than a lost armored truck. It's murder, theft, and corruption tied together. And the fact that you were chased means someone is still protecting the secret. Ethan nodded grimly. I can't go to the sheriff. I don't know who's clean. Maybe no one. Sarah leaned forward again, her expression fierce. Then you came to the right place. But you need to understand. Once I publish, there's no turning back. You'll have enemies you've never seen, people with money and power who won't hesitate to silence us. Ethan glanced down at Rex, who sat watching Sarah intently, ears perked. He stroked the dog's head and answered, We've already been marked. The only way out is through. For the next hour, they worked side by side. Sarah scanned documents, made notes in her leather-bound book, and asked precise questions about details Ethan barely remembered noticing. Her energy was sharp, electric, as if she thrived in the face of danger. Ethan, though weary, found himself steadied by her confidence. For the first time since uncovering the truck, he felt the weight of the secret shifting, no longer his burden alone. When their meeting ended, Sarah gathered the photographs carefully, her expression set with determination. I'll dig into the names, the records, the politics of that year. There will be trails they tried to bury, but nothing disappears completely. You, Officer Cole, keep yourself alive. If they've come for you once, they'll come again. Ethan rose, Rex following, the dog's nails clicking against the tile. He offered Sarah a firm handshake, her grip surprisingly strong for her slender frame. They exchanged no promises beyond what was already clear. The truth demanded to be told. As Ethan and Rex stepped out of the newsroom, the street outside was bathed in the glow of flickering street lamps. Their shadows stretched long against the pavement, twin figures bound by loyalty and burden. Ethan tightened his coat against the chill, the sound of the city humming faintly in the distance. He knew this was only the beginning. The secret he had stumbled upon was no longer a whisper in the forest. It was a storm-gathering force, and he and Rex would stand in its path, no matter the cost. Sometimes the forest keeps its secrets buried, and sometimes God allows them to be unearthed, not to frighten us, but to remind us that truth cannot stay hidden forever. Ethan and Rex stumbled upon an armored truck, but what they truly uncovered was proof that even in the darkest corruption, light still pushes through. It is the same in our lives. We all face hidden battles, unspoken struggles, and shadows that threaten to silence us. But with courage, faith, and the loyalty of those who walk beside us, whether friend, family, or even a faithful dog, God shows us that nothing buried stays lost when He wills it to be found. May this story remind us to keep faith in the quiet miracles around us, the ones we often overlook in daily life. A kind word, a protective hand, or the simple act of choosing truth over silence. If you believe, as I do, that God works in mysterious ways, even through fear, danger, and loss, then you already know this. Every hidden truth is another chance for His light to shine. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Don't forget to comment your thoughts, subscribe to the channel for more stories of courage and faith, and may God bless you and your loved ones always.